So it's the end of the year, well, at least when we're recording this. It's probably going to be freaking June when it actually comes out. So what did you do this month?
I started out with a movie that was originally filmed in 1964 under the title Cannibal Orgy, but was not released until 1968 under the title Spider Baby or the Maddest Story Ever Told.
Oh, yeah, I like that movie.
Okay.
I didn't know that was its original title.
Yeah. Despite the fact that there is no cannibal orgy in the movie, I still liked it. Basically, you've got Lon Chaney as the caretaker of a family that lives in a house that everybody kind of shuns because people keep getting attacked around there. And it turns out the family that lives in the house has a disease that, as they age, causes their minds to degenerate and eventually their physical bodies to degenerate. So basically you have adults acting like children and they kill people.
So this always comes up as one of Sid Haig's earliest movies. Was it his first movie?
Well, this was directed by Jack Hill, and they did a lot of stuff together, and I know Sid Haig was in at least a student film that Jack Hill had done before. I don't know if this was his first theatrical movie or not. It could have been. I feel like this movie had to have been an influence on House of a Thousand Corpses.
Yeah, I could totally see that.
The difference being that Rob Zombie is Rob Zombie, and this is a movie made by somebody who knows what they're doing. Yeah, I enjoyed this movie a lot. It has a really good sense of humor. Right from the start, when you have Lon Chaney kind of singing this weird song about monsters and stuff that's super goofy and feels like it belongs in like a Rankin Bass Christmas special or something.
Yeah, when you read the synopsis, you think, and it's marketed as a horror movie, you're like, okay, I think I know what to expect. But then it is so goofy.
And the fact that it is not goofy by accident, but it knows what it's doing. It really works. The humor's great. I mean, it reminded me a lot of Switchblade Sisters, also by Jack Hill, which, again, has that same kind of thing where on the surface it's kind of just a straight movie, but then there's a kind of a layer of, I don't know if I'd say satire, but it's almost kind of making fun of itself in the kind of movie that it is, which in the case of Switchblade Sisters, it's like a gang movie kind of, and this is a horror movie. So yeah, I really like this movie a lot. I actually went out and bought the DVD when I was only like halfway through watching it on TCM. So.
Oh, TCM. I saw it on Tubi not too long ago.
Arrow put out a good release that has a bunch of bonus stuff and stuff like that.
I'll have to check that out.
I watched a movie from 1962 called City of the Dead, which was a British movie that was released in the US under the title Horror Hotel.
That's kind of a downgrade, going from a whole city to just a hotel.
Yeah, and the American title doesn't really make sense, which is not surprising. Again, it's a British studio, but it's set in the US, so you have a bunch of British actors doing American accents, including Christopher Lee, who is not terrible, but it's not a convincing accent at all. And it's hard, given when you just know who Christopher Lee is, to see him as an American.
Burn, witch, burn, burn, burn. So shouted the people of Whitewood when they burned Elizabeth Selwyn in 1692.
So you start out back in the kind of witch trials era where this witch is being burned at the stake, and she puts a curse on this town. And in the present, there's this girl that's studying under Christopher Lee. He's a professor, and she is interested in witchcraft and everything, but from an academic standpoint. And she decides she's going to visit this town to try to kind of learn more about the background and stuff like that. But it turns out that the people that still live there are all part of this whole cult, and they need some people to sacrifice. And now she's going to be going over there, so she's, going into some danger. I'm not going to spoil what happens, but it did go in directions that I was not expecting.
I think it'd be funny if they all turned out to be British. Start speaking in their natural accents.
It was a darker movie than I thought it was going to be. And by the time it was getting to the end, I honestly didn't know if anybody was going to survive. A nice surprise for a movie from 1962. In some ways, and not even because Christopher Lee was in it, it felt like a precursor to The Wicker Man, where you have kind of the whole town is in on this secret, and they're trying to sacrifice people, and you have one innocent person that's there in the town, kind of slowly figuring things out.
Was anybody notable involved in the making of this one?
This was, I think, the first movie that was co-produced by Milton Subotsky and Max Rosenberg, who would go on to found Amicus Studios, which was kind of like a smaller version of Hammer. They were kind of trying to do the same thing, and they got a lot of the same actors and did kind of similar type movies, but usually lower budget. There were also some similarities to Psycho which I won't spoil, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was a direct influence on this movie. But yeah, this movie was really good. It is public domain, so you can probably just find it on YouTube. It was really good. I watched a movie from 1984 called The Ice Pirates. I have never asked so much while watching a movie, why was this movie made? This was one of the weirdest movies I've ever seen. The most pointless movie I've probably ever seen. It's hard to even describe. It feels like a lot of 80s fantasy movies in some ways, in terms of production, and in the way where it feels like the people making it don't really know what they're doing or don't understand their target audience.
Was it an adventure movie?
Maybe? So, from what I understand, because I did look it up, I tried to figure out how this turned out the way it did. Apparently they had a script that was kind of like a straight sci-fi adventure movie, and for whatever reason they were having trouble making it, and the guy that they finally hired to direct it agreed to direct it in a way where he would turn it into a comedy. But from watching the movie, it feels like he doesn't understand the concept of humor, because it felt kind of like Police Academy in the way that there are things in the movie that are supposed to be funny, but they're not actual jokes. They're just kind of there. So the very start of the movie, you have a bunch of fart jokes where your main characters are attacking another ship, they're busting in, this is in the future on space and everything, and there's an alien sitting on the toilet in this ship, and he just keeps farting through the whole scene as the main characters are shuffling past him to get into the ship. It gives you the impression that it's going to be a kid's movie, but then later you have sex jokes and jokes about space herpes and stuff, and almost kind of a sex scene, although you don't see anything, and it's played for humor. There were tiny little bits in it that I thought were funny, but they were so minor compared to the rest of the movie. It was interesting. So basically the overall concept is the main character is an ice pirate. In the future, water is what everybody cares about. This is what the movie tells you at the very beginning with kind of like the title text. Everybody needs water. So these guys are going out stealing ice from ships, and that's how you store it, I guess, in ice for some reason. But that's the setup, and it never comes up again through the entire movie. The movie is called The Ice Pirates, but the fact that they're stealing water never matters. And basically what happens is they kidnap this girl from this ship, and she herself has been kidnapped from somewhere else. She's a princess or something, and eventually she falls in love with the main guy for some reason, even though they're kind of fighting the whole time. And after a while, I stopped really paying attention because I already didn't understand what was happening anyway, and I didn't care, and it was so stupid. So I kind of just left it in the background. But I would say that if people want to know how weird movies can get, just in terms of why the hell would they do it like this, I would say look up some clips from this movie because it's so strange. It's not entertaining, but it is interesting in a way. The one thing I did like about the movie was the two leads. I actually thought they were both really good in their parts, the princess and the kind of main pirate guy. They both had a lot of charisma, they had good chemistry together, they knew how to deliver their dialogue, but sometimes just the way their scenes were written were just so stupid and didn't make any sense that it still didn't work. And again, so much of the humor was so dumb that it just made me question everything. So it's not a good movie, but it's an interesting movie, I guess. I watched a Hammer movie from 1971 called Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde. As you can probably tell, the idea is instead of Dr. Jekyll turning into a monster guy, he turns into a woman.
A monster woman or just a woman?
Just a woman. Other than that basic idea, it doesn't have anything to do with the original story. It's a completely different thing. It was written by Brian Clemens, who we talked about in our Captain Kronos review, and this one also feels more intelligent than most Hammer movies in the way that it's written. I kind of thought going in that they were just going to kind of play up the sex angle of the fact that he's a woman, and I don't know. And it's in there, but the movie was a lot more interesting than I thought it was going to be. Like the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen comic, they kind of combined the Mr. Hyde idea with the Jack the Ripper killings, and in this case also with Burke and Hare, even though in real life there were 60 years separating Jack the Ripper and Burke and Hare. But in this movie, they kind of throw everything together, and it's actually Dr. Jekyll that's committing the murders, not Sister Hyde, because he needs some kind of enzyme or hormone or something from women that he uses for his experiments, and what he's trying to do is make people be able to live longer. But when he tests it on himself, he turns into a woman, which leads to some, like, Ranma 1/2 style shenanigans, where Dr. Jekyll has to tell people that Hyde is his sister, and they have to kind of get over the fact that nobody can see them together and that they might transform back into the other person. And you have a woman in the building that he lives in who's interested in Dr. Jekyll, and her brother is interested in Sister Hyde. So it feels almost like it could turn into some kind of weird sitcom kind of thing.
It sounds comical.
Yeah, it is at times, but not in a goofy way or anything. It's kind of like it's not the kind of humor where you laugh out loud at it. It's kind of just the humor of the situations. But it was a good movie. I was surprised.
Who's the actor that plays Jekyll?
Ralph Bates, and Sister Hyde is played by Martine Beswick.
I was going to ask if it's still Ralph Bates.
Oh, no, that would have been funny. The one thing that kind of disappointed me was the ending. I thought I knew how it was going to end, and it would have been a much better ending if it had ended that way. And it kind of makes you think that maybe it's going to end a certain way. But then I'm guessing that it originally did end that way in the story, and then maybe the producers stepped in and said, do it like this because people need more closure or something. So it could have been slightly better there at the end, but it was a good movie. I was surprised. I watched the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special from 2022. This was a Disney Plus exclusive thing. It was about an hour long. It wasn't a full movie.
I'm surprised you even have Disney Plus.
My brother has Disney Plus, so every once in a while I watch a Simpsons episode on it, basically.
Wait, that's on Disney Plus?
Yes.
Oh yeah, because they own Fox now.
That's the main thing that I've watched on there. They actually have all the Netflix Marvel stuff on there now too. So I don't pay attention to the Marvel Cinematic Universe stuff at this point, but I do like James Gunn for the most part. So I was expecting to like this, but given that it's not a full movie, it definitely feels like they said, hey, you want to kind of just throw something together and just, we'll just throw it up there. And he said, okay. So it feels like something that's kind of just haphazardly conceived. It's basically just one joke extended over an hour, which is, hey, look, it's Kevin Bacon. And that's the entire joke. That's what you're supposed to find funny about it. Basically, Peter Quill is sad because he's out in space and doesn't have Christmas or whatever. So Drax and Mantis, who are two of my favorite characters from those movies, and I really like their interactions together, they decide they're going to kidnap Kevin Bacon and bring him to Peter Quill, to Chris Pratt, because that's all he ever talks about or whatever. Their impression is that Kevin Bacon is like his idol, but also that he's a hero that has done all this stuff because he talks about the movies as if they're things that really happened.
So is this live action?
Yes.
And this is with the actual actors from the movie?
Yes.
Ugh.
So again, Drax and Mantis, I really like them in the movies. I mean, I guess Mantis was only in the second one. But this whole thing, again, was very one note, one joke. I didn't think it was all that funny. It felt a little too much like James Gunn just kind of goofing off. And that was about it. So I didn't enjoy it. I thought it was kind of a waste of time. There were some funny bits in it, but overall I didn't like it. So yeah, I'm a little less interested now in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and I already didn't like the second one anywhere near as much as I liked the first one. I watched a movie called Hell to Eternity, which was from 1960. This was a World War II movie that was focusing on the Pacific theater, which I feel like you don't really get anywhere near as much as the European. You had Jeffrey Hunter as the lead, who was Captain Pike in the original Star Trek, and George Takei plays his best friend in the movie. So you got some Star Trek stuff in there. This was based on a real person's life who was a guy that was orphaned at a young age in California, a white guy that was raised by a Japanese family. And when Pearl Harbor happens, he starts to see all this racism develop against the Japanese over in California, and he eventually decides to enlist in the Marines and goes off to fight in the Pacific. And the whole time he's kind of dealing with the fact that he was raised by Japanese people, so he sees the enemy, in this case, as humans. He's kind of, he humanizes them, whereas everybody else sees them as being different from them and just being, the Japs, as they keep saying throughout the movie. So he's kind of dealing with moral issues through the whole thing, and he speaks Japanese, so he's able to communicate with them, and he kind of tries to turn things in kind of a better direction, but things don't go well because it's a war situation. And it turned out to be a really good movie. I enjoyed it a lot. I meant to look up to see if there was a book about this guy because I would definitely be interested in reading it. The only negative I would really point to was a lot of the extras in... I mean, I'm assuming they just got whatever Japanese-speaking or Japanese people they could to stick in the movie. A lot of them are really bad. There are scenes where they're supposed to be getting shot or whatever, and they just... It looks like they are just having fun and don't really understand the way they're supposed to be acting. So it's really distracting when it's supposed to be a serious scene and people are getting killed and you have these people that are just rolling around. So other than that, it was a good movie. It was really long, too. I think it was over 2 hours, but it was worth it. That's everything I watched. I read The Devil Genghis, or Genghis if you prefer, which was one of the Doc Savage books from December 1938.
So I remember in one of your earlier videos, you were saying the Doc Savage books are not well written. Is that a blanket statement or just some of them?
Well, that actually was something that I thought about in this one, because this one has the return of the villain John Sunlight, and that was the one that I talked about where it was really badly written.
Right.
This is still the same writer, but the writing was much better in this one. So I'm assuming, given that he's writing one every month, there are times when he's just kind of pressed for time and has to just get through it, and there are others where he probably is able to devote a little bit more to it. And this one was definitely better, but it's still, the writing is not good. Again, when you're writing a novel every month for years, and you're having to, not only write out the whole thing, but come up with the ideas and everything, it's a lot. I don't really hold too much against it that the writing isn't good. And honestly, I think at the time they probably were trying to keep the writing at a relatively low level, because that was kind of like a lowest common denominator audience kind of thing. It would give them more people that would be able to read what they're putting out. So last time, John Sunlight was a villain that broke into Doc Savage's Fortress of Solitude and stole a bunch of his super weapons and stuff. And he supposedly died at the end of that story, but it was pretty obvious that he had faked his death in some way. So in this story, he comes back, he stages a bunch of attacks on Doc Savage, and there's also, these stories usually have kind of a mystery element where you don't really know what's going on, and maybe there's some kind of weird sci-fi thing happening. So in this story, you have a bunch of people that seem to be going into some kind of weird trance or something where they seem to have hallucinations of something above them in the air that's trying to attack them, and they keep trying to fight it off until eventually they just end up dying, basically, because they don't do anything else. And there's kind of a chain of people that keeps happening to, and a dog at one point. So you have your protagonist kind of trying to follow that and figure out what's going on with that, while also being attacked by other people. And if you don't know going in that John Sunlight is the villain, he actually doesn't pop up until pretty late into the story, which was kind of a negative a little bit, because I was hoping to learn more about him, and you never really do. You at the beginning of the first one, you kind of know that he was in like a Russian prison and stuff, but you never really find out anything else. But I did enjoy this one a lot. Spoiler, he definitively dies in this one, and it was pretty freaking extreme, his death. I was really surprised that they went as far as they did with just saying, like, he is definitely dead now, like, look at what happened.
All right, I'm not going to read it, so I think you should tell me right now.
Okay, so it's called The Devil Genghis. Genghis was actually Genghis Khan's name, and Khan is actually the title, but they kind of mixed it up, I guess, here. So John Sunlight is kind of rising up as a new Khan in the region, and is kind of leading all these people, and he's all about power, basically. And Doc Savage ends up having to pretend to kind of be an affiliate of kind of like a god being. So he leads his own people, and at the end there's like this big war between the two of them, which I was not expecting at all, even halfway through the story. That doesn't even come up until kind of close to the end. And at the end, John Sunlight tries to escape, but everybody knows that he's lying about everything now, and he basically runs out into the open where all these people are, and they all have swords, and they were all fighting each other before, but now they're all unified against him, so they just basically chop him up into just a bunch of little pieces, and there's just blood all over the place and just pieces everywhere. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, it was cool. So the two John Sunlight stories were the stories that were chosen for the first volume of the Nostalgia Ventures reprint line of the Doc Savage stories, which kind of started in like the mid-2000s, and I can definitely see why they chose these two. In my experience, you don't usually get as strong of villains in the Doc Savage stories. It's more about the action along the way. But these were really cool to have somebody who was genuinely intimidating in his own way and felt like a threat that you didn't know how they were going to beat him. And I liked this one in particular because usually Doc Savage is kind of the super ultimate human that is invulnerable in every way and can overcome any obstacle very easily. But in this story, there are multiple times when he's uncomfortable in like public situations. Sometimes he doesn't know how to act. There are times when he doesn't know what to do, how to escape a situation, or he has a plan, but then something gets in the way and he's like, oh shit, that's not going to work, and he's got to kind of figure something else out. So it humanized him in a way that made him a lot more interesting. instead of just being the guy that's going to bust in and just beat everybody up really easily. Again, Doc Savage is kind of one of the main influences on Superman, so that's usually more the way he's portrayed. So I definitely like this one a lot. It might be my favorite, one of my favorites, definitely, of the ones that I've read. I read Showcase Presents The Phantom Stranger Volume 1.
All right.
Yeah, which collects the Phantom Stranger stories from the late 60s into the early 70s, and some of those early issues reprint stories from the 50s. The Phantom Stranger originally showed up back in the 50s, and they also reprint, some of the early ones reprint stories with Dr. 13, who was also from the 50s, but then after a while it becomes all new stories with both of them.
I thought a lot of those were very repetitive.
Yeah, you can definitely tell that they're created more in a time where there's not really a sense of continuity. You just kind of go into a story and it's like, it's got to wrap up at the end. And I feel like a lot of the ideas that they come up with in these stories and in the earlier House of Mystery and House of Secrets stories are kind of similar a lot of the time. It feels like they just kind of change the details around, or maybe the setting.
Yeah. I thought it was very humorous how at the end of each story, the Phantom Stranger, who is supernatural in his own right, and his goal is to prove that the events were supernatural, and Dr. 13 is the complete opposite. He's trying to debunk all of that stuff. They both find evidence at the end that reinforces their own viewpoint.
Yeah, which is really ridiculous sometimes, but in a way kind of realistic sometimes in the way that people look at things.
Yeah.
But not in terms of these stories, given what actually happens in the stories.
Right.
And I really like the fact that with the Phantom Stranger, you don't know who he is. He really is a Phantom Stranger, even to the reader. You don't know who he is. You don't know where he came from. You don't really completely know what his goals are. You just know he's kind of fighting evil.
And as far as I know, even now, they haven't given him really more of a backstory.
Yeah, I know there was a comic, I think in the late 80s, that presented like 4 possible origins for him, which it's really cool that even back then they kind of said, let's not make it a definitive thing. It could be any one of these, and they're all completely different from each other.
And you would think, especially today, when everything has to have an origin story and be laid out so matter of fact, that they still haven't said, this is who he is.
Yeah, I think it helps that he's a relatively obscure character.
I agree.
I mean, you have something like Wolverine where they have gone into every possible detail of, every cigar that he ever smoked on the way to being who he is now or whatever.
Yeah, I hope they never go deep into the Phantom Stranger's backstory.
Yeah, I'm sure they will at some point. But then DC also obviously has a history of kind of restarting things and doing new versions and stuff like that. So it wouldn't bother me as much when it comes to a DC character like that.
If they make a movie of him, I hope he spends most of it just standing, proclaiming to people that he is the Phantom Stranger before vanishing. Because that seemed to be in every issue.
Yeah, always kind of half in shadow and like a lot of fog around him and stuff
just
like
yelling about himself.
Yeah, I could see him being played by like Michael Fassbender or something. I feel like that would be cool.
Really?
Yeah, because I'm picturing him like where you can't really see his eyes, and it's just kind of like the top half of his face is in shadow.
Oh, you're thinking like serious. I was thinking comedic. I think put Will Arnett in that thing.
I would hate that. If you read these comics expecting kind of straight superhero stuff, that's not really what you get. It's kind of a blend of kind of supernatural stuff and kind of some superhero stuff, because the Phantom Stranger is a hero that comes in and tries to save people and stuff, but definitely not in a traditional superhero kind of way.
There was a little more continuity in the second volume.
There is more in the first one as it goes on, too, especially once Tala comes in. She makes a lot of return appearances, and I actually really liked the way she's kind of clearly a very villainous character, but she and the Phantom Stranger also have kind of like their weird romance thing going on. But like not in a Batman Catwoman kind of way. I feel like it's unique, and it to me it was really interesting.
Did you get Tanarak or whatever his name is in that one?
I think so, but I don't remember who that was.
Yeah, that's one of his trademarks. All of his villains start with T. I just made that up.
Okay. It sounds plausible.
It's just coincidental.
And in the second half of this book, you start getting a lot of art by Jim Aparo. And I would say, I mean, the stories appeal to me as somebody who likes the supernatural side of the DC universe, but I think the art was the best part of it once you get into that second half.
And because this is a showcase volume, it's in black and white, so that detail really pops out.
Yeah, these are definitely comics that I would not be as interested in seeing in color. I think they probably work a lot better in black and white. I read a Star Trek novel called The Rift, which was by Peter David. It came out around the time of Season 7 of TNG, I think, but it was involving the original series characters. Actually, it starts out back in the Pike era, where this rift in space opens up, this wormhole, that these super intelligent aliens come out and contact the Enterprise, and they end up letting them go through and showing them their society and everything. But the rift is unstable, so they end up having to leave, and 50 years later or whatever, or no, I think it's like 30-something years later, it's going to open up again. So the Enterprise, now under the command of Kirk, is going to visit these aliens again, and Ensign Tyler, I think he was an ensign from the Pike era, is on the ship again, because back in that era he met a female alien and fell in love with her, and he wants to kind of go back and be with her again. And of course, things don't go the way they plan, and in the current era they also have a couple of other aliens on the Enterprise, an Andorian and some other one, I can't remember what the other one was. And they're going to kind of try to meet with them and, see if they can exchange scientific ideas and, all the kind of stuff. I went into this as a fan of Peter David. He is one of the few writers where I can say I've never read anything by him that I didn't like, with the exception, in his case, of the Spider-Man 3 novelization. But I don't blame him for that. But he's done tons of great comic work, and I actually really like his novelization of the first Spider-Man movie. I thought it was way better than the actual movie. I read an interview with him where he said that when he presented this idea, he actually presented 3 different plots, and he thought 2 of them were really interesting, and one of them was just a hodgepodge of a bunch of Star Trek ideas thrown together, and that ended up being the one that they went with.
Of course.
So, yeah. So he felt like he really had to kind of work to make this interesting, and it was interesting, but honestly, the fact that it is just a bunch of ideas thrown together really held it back a lot, because there is just too much going on in this book with not enough time devoted to any of the individual elements for any of them to really work.
Well, it sounds like a Season 7 episode of TNG.
Yeah, I mean, you have the relationship between Tyler and the female alien. You have the whole first contact with this alien race. You find out why the Enterprise speaks with Majel Barrett's voice.
Yeah, because she was married to Gene Roddenberry.
Well, in real life, yeah, but you find out in universe, I guess.
Yeah, Gene Roddenberry actually existed, and he froze himself. These are spoilers, by the way. And he thawed out in that era with Majel Barrett, and it was right as they were building the Enterprise.
Well, I can't wait to get to that episode.
Yeah.
You have Dr. Daystrom from one of the original series episodes who created the computers for the Enterprise.
The Daystrom Institute.
Yeah, he is on the ship, and there's an entire chapter kind of in the middle of the book focusing on him and his mental breakdown back in that episode and kind of how it's going to affect him going forward. And you devote a chapter to it, it makes me think it's going to come up again later. It's going to matter in the story, but it never does. He's just kind of in the background the whole time.
This book sounds very fan servicey.
Yeah, it is in some ways. Robert Fox was also in this book, who was from that episode where there are 2 cities at war or whatever that fight via computers, and then they all commit suicide when regions are supposedly destroyed in the simulation. He's supposed to be a diplomat, even though he's a really bad diplomat, so they bring him back here, and again, he never really matters all that much.
What page does Clint Howard as a baby show up?
Oh man, well that would have been cool. But yeah, there is so much stuff in this book, so many different things that have nothing to do with each other than being Star Trek things.
Yeah, it sounds fan servicey.
Yeah, and there's just too much. It doesn't give enough time to any of those individual elements. So many of them, Dr. Daystrom and Robert Fox could have been cut out altogether. If it had just focused on Tyler and the woman and their relationship, it would have been a lot more interesting. But you end up having them on the Enterprise and Kirk and kind of trying to deal with everything there, where it turns out she doesn't want to go back to her race or whatever, because they're going to kill her once she reaches a certain age or whatever, so you get some half-a-life stuff thrown in there. Back on the other side of the rift, you've got Spock and Scotty and some other people that are kind of fighting the aliens on that side. There's some pretty big action stuff in this book, too. It almost felt like it was trying to be a movie, but again, with just too many elements for any of them to really work. It wasn't bad, but it just didn't work nearly as well as it could have. And there was some good humor in it too. Peter David is good at sticking in humorous bits that don't kind of override the story too much. So I wouldn't really recommend it unless you're a huge Star Trek fan, and just it was more interesting kind of for just the little details of why the ship speaks with Majel Barrett's voice, and it's some little things like that. But it wasn't all that great. I read The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, which was from 1959. So I know a lot of people read The Lottery in high school or whatever. I didn't. I've never read anything by Shirley Jackson before this, but I am definitely interested now. This book was great. I've talked a little bit before about The Haunting from 1963, which is an adaptation of this book, and how it's my favorite ghost or haunted house movie. So I went into this hoping it was going to be at least that good.
I thought 13 Ghosts with Tony Shalhoub was your favorite haunted house movie.
This book, honestly, was way better than I thought it was going to be. The movie is a movie about a haunted house. The book focuses a lot more on the characters and is about people that almost just kind of happen to be in a haunted house. And even the house is almost like a character in the book. So if you go in expecting just kind of like a straightforward horror story with scary stuff and whatever, you're not really going to get it here. There were some really good sequences in it like that, but that's not what the focus of the book is. It really is about the characters. And, I mean, it takes a long time before you even get to the house, focusing on your protagonist, Eleanor. And I really liked it. The writing was really good. Just the prose itself, and then kind of the progression of things was really interesting. I was actually surprised pretty close to the end of the book when suddenly some new characters are thrown in, and I was kind of like, well, what are they going to do with this? And it turned out they were really funny. All the interactions between all the characters are really well written, and she does a really good job of getting you to kind of see the characters' perspectives and kind of see how they look at the world without outright telling you anything about them like that. It all comes out in the way they act toward each other and the things that they say, and it was really good. If you want kind of a more of a character thing, this is the one to look for. I have not seen anything about the Netflix adaptation either, so I will be checking that out. I do also want to go back and rewatch The Haunting to see how different it is from the book now that I've read the book, because it's been a while since I've seen it.
What is the Netflix adaptation called?
The Haunting of Hill House.
Oh, okay.
It was a one-season thing, and then they did a second season that was an adaptation of The Turn of the Screw, I think, which I do also plan on reading.
I watched both of those.
Okay.
I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to wait until you watch them and we can talk about them.
Okay. And I guess I'll just mention that the book, basically the kind of story is, you have a guy that studies supernatural stuff, and he hears about this house, so he sends invitations out to people, and 3 people answer the invitations and agree to spend some time in this house, and basically they're just going to document whatever happens. And all of them kind of have their own issues in their backgrounds, and they all end up feeling like very much like real people and kind of sympathetic in their own ways. And Eleanor, the main character, she's been dealing with her mother, who has been sick for a long time, and her mother recently died. And since she basically spent all her time doing that for years, she doesn't really know how to interact with people. She doesn't really know what it's like to be happy because she's just been miserable all the time. So this is very much kind of an adventure for her, is kind of how she looks at it. So yeah, it's definitely a really good book, really good characters. I liked it a lot.
I'm interested to see what you think of this show.
Yeah, me too. And then I read The Forever People, the Jack Kirby collection. So you talked about the Fourth World stuff before. So this is all stuff from the early 70s, from when Jack Kirby went over to DC after leaving Marvel. I think out of all the New Gods stuff that he did, and it's all interconnected very closely, it's not really the kind of thing where you're not supposed to just read, New Gods or just Mr. Miracle or just Forever People. You really are supposed to kind of go back and forth between them. Jack Kirby was really kind of building out an entire universe all at the same time. Out of all of that, I think the Forever People by far are the least interesting characters.
Which is ironic considering there's a team of them and they all have all these different powers and abilities and stuff.
Yeah, I think that's what ends up actually kind of holding them back, is there's not, you don't really have a chance to focus on the individual characters and really get a sense of their personalities or their backgrounds or anything. You really don't find out anything about them over the course of the entire series.
Right.
You know their names, and you know kind of their gimmicks, like the guy that pulls the capsules out of his hat, or the guy that's just really big and strong, or whatever.
And knowing that Jack Kirby liked to stretch things out and his Fourth World stuff got cut off abruptly, I still didn't get the feeling that he was going to flesh out the history or backstory of those characters.
Yeah, I wonder how much of that was the fact that he was kind of tying everything together at the same time, so you had to kind of give more to the stories than the characters in this case, I guess.
If anything, he seemed more interested in the Infinity Man.
Maybe. I mean, but it like the Infinity Man disappears pretty early on, though, and doesn't show up again until the very end.
I mean, I was more interested when he got banished.
Yeah.
Where he was, what he was doing, than the Forever People who were still there.
Yeah, which reading that felt a lot like he was kind of taking that from the Silver Surfer, where the Silver Surfer is banished to Earth by Galactus and can't leave because Galactus sets up like a barrier around Earth. It was kind of the same thing, where Infinity Man couldn't escape from this other world to get through the barrier back to the regular dimension or whatever.
Until they thought about him. Oh, man.
Yeah. I mean, it felt like a Jack Kirby thing.
Well, that was also at the end, when he was being very rushed to wrap everything up.
Yeah. And that's what it felt like. I mean, that entire last issue is just the Pursuer, Devil Lance, who is a character that we've never even seen before. Almost the entire issue is just him kind of fighting the Forever People, and then they kind of resolve things at the end.
He showed up in, I think it was one of the big Crisis events, which I thought was really funny. I can't remember, it's a small team of people, and all of a sudden he's like gigantic, and he's like, I'm going to pursue you, and I'm like, holy shit, it's f***ing Devil Ants.
In New Gods and Mr. Miracle, every once in a while you would get an issue that would be taking place in the past, and that would be setting up backstory and stuff like that. And a lot of times at the end of an issue, you'd get a kind of like a short story that would also do that and just kind of flesh out different aspects of the characters or the world or whatever. And I don't think you got that at all in Forever People. Actually, I'm looking at it, there is one of those right here. But it's just about New Genesis. It doesn't really have anything to do with the Forever People.
Yeah, it was mostly, it would be one of the Forever People would zoom by on New Genesis, and Highfather would say something like, oh, youth, they are our future. You're so great.
Yeah.
Now, don't go too fast on your rocket roller skates.
And I wonder if, because obviously it's kind of like Jack Kirby's version of hippies.
Yeah, especially their speech.
Yeah, and I wonder if that's kind of just how he looked at them, was that they're kind of a representation of youth, as opposed to actually looking at them as individual people. And yeah, it definitely would have benefited a lot from fleshing them out as characters, instead of just having them be a kind of a unified team.
I can't even remember all of their names.
Yeah, I struggle sometimes.
I just think of them as Cowboy Kid. Big Bear was actually his name, right?
Yeah.
Beautiful Dreamer. Moon Racer?
Moonrider. Mark Moonrider, yeah.
And then there's another one in there.
Viking the Black.
Oh, that's right.
Because he was black.
Hey.
Which thankfully they dropped that after a while. It just becomes Viking. I think he kind of realized that was kind of maybe not the best way to do it.
Is that all of them?
I think so. Yeah, the fact that we're not even sure says a lot. But the stories themselves were still really cool. I especially like the one where they get captured by like Darkseid's forces or whatever, and they're in the amusement park, kind of being tortured by the people that are visiting without them realizing what's happening. Mm-hmm. It was a really weird idea, but I thought it was really cool.
Seems like comic books have a weird obsession with being trapped in a carnival setting, as we'll see later when I talk about one of mine.
Well, I do know that Jack Kirby had some kind of interest in circuses or something like that. I've seen that referenced somewhere. And he does have, there's an issue of the Avengers where the Hulk is trying to hide out, so he joins a circus and wears clown makeup and stuff. But yeah, I would say for people who do want to read the Fourth World stuff, I would say you should read all of it, including Jimmy Olsen. Jimmy Olsen is definitely less important. It kind of becomes its own thing and just kind of a Jimmy Olsen comic after a while. But it does introduce a lot of those elements. And it's not to say that these issues are not as good as some of the other ones. It's just that the characters themselves are not as interesting. But the storylines still work, and the individual issues still work. And I think Darkseid shows up more in here, or at least has more direct interactions with these characters than he does in some of the other books, I think.
Yeah, that seems pretty accurate. Which doesn't really make any sense, because the Forever People don't really do anything to oppose him other than saying, we don't like you.
Yeah, they're almost just kind of a random group of people that just happen to be there sometimes.
And Darkseid seeks them out.
Yeah, but my favorite scene out of maybe any of these Fourth World things is in this book where Darkseid is confronting the Forever People, and he's completely unafraid. You know, they're kind of stuttering and trembling before him, and he's just kind of like, I'm Darkseid, I don't have anything to worry about. Like, you guys need to watch the hell out. And anytime they try to say something against him, he's just like, yeah, I'm Darkseid. Like, it doesn't matter.
Which I really think is a Jack Kirby thing of the youth standing up to the authority and just being shut down.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. That's everything I checked out this month. What did you check out this month?
I watched Resident Evil Retribution,
Oh, jeez.
which is from 2012. I don't know the order of these movies. They just kind of pop up. So apparently this is the 5th movie, and Alice, played by Mila Jovovich, wakes up in an unfamiliar location and doesn't know what's going on. So that's never happened in this series before. And she has to fight a bunch of zombies to achieve the goal of the movie, which is to get to the next movie. It turns out she's in an umbrella facility that is on the ocean floor.
Of course.
That is made up of these big domes, and each one is so huge because it's meant to mimic the effects of an outbreak so Umbrella can study it or something. So it's the movie's excuse to say, okay, now you're in New York City. Now you're in Tokyo. Now you're in Moscow. There's a bunch of clones, which I don't think is new for this series, especially by this movie. There's a lot of fighting of zombies and stuff. But what I found particularly ridiculous in a movie franchise that is nothing but ridiculous was the amount of characters shoved into this movie, both from the movie franchise and the games. So movie characters, you've got Alice, but hey, Michelle Rodriguez's character from the first movie, she's in this movie too, twice, because she's a clone twice.
Even though her character didn't matter at all in that first movie.
Right. And I had to look up the names of these people, because I did not remember. You've got James, the guy who was cut up by the laser grid in the first movie. You've got the Red Queen, who's in charge of everything now. You've got Carlos and Luther, who are apparently people from all the other movies.
Carlos was from the third game.
Oh, damn.
Yeah, he was a very, very minor character.
Well, still going off game characters, you got Jill, who is evil in this one because she's got that big glowing red jewel bug latched onto her chest. Which Alice figures out in the end, that's what she has to destroy to free Jill from her brainwashing. You've got Ada Wong, who just shows up with Wesker. You've got Leon. You've got Barry. You got this giant liquor for some reason. And the Las Plagas virus is everywhere too.
Oh, man.
And they refer to it like they do in the game where they say the Las Plagas virus.
Man. I was about to ask that. That's awesome.
So the guy that plays Leon, and you can tell he's Leon because he has that hair.
His defining character attributes.
So Michelle Rodriguez, the evil clone, says, I'm going to fight you guys. And then she injects herself with the Las Plagas virus. And it's this gigantic bug that's probably the size of a computer mouse. It's huge. And it just goes into her neck. And Leon, just to let us know, goes, the Las Plagas virus.
I mean, that actress, I'm pretty sure she speaks Spanish in real life. You would think she would say, hey, this is stupid. This doesn't make sense. Like, this is a minor thing that you can easily fix.
You would think anybody in any of these movies would say that about the movie that they're filming.
Yeah, that's true.
So at the end, Alice wins. But then something happens that launches the next movie that was unexpected. So that was good. I watched The Fable from 2019, which is the first movie in a series of 2. I actually watched the second one first without realizing it was the second one. And there's this guy who is a perfect trained killer. He's very socially awkward, but he's a master assassin. And he's tasked by his mentor to live a normal life for a year, which, as far as I remember, is kind of the plot of the second movie too. And circumstances arise which prevent him from living a normal life. I liked the second one better because the storytelling was more thought out. And because the character setup is pretty much the same, you're not really missing out by watching the second one first. And it's all based on a manga, which I guess was pretty popular, but I'm not really too interested in seeking it out. There was a little bit of humor, but I felt like the second movie really handled everything better. I watched Who Killed Santa, which was a Murderville spin-off episode, which I talked about a couple months ago, and that was from 2022. That was the Will Arnett ad-lib thing, where he plays a murder detective, and there's a guest star playing a detective in training, and it's always a different person in each episode, and they have to figure out who the murderer is. But the guest star doesn't know anything about what's going on and kind of has to play it out as it goes on. So in this one, Santa is murdered and they got to find out who the killer is. But instead of one guest character who doesn't know what's going on, there are three, which completely backfires because it makes it much weaker than the other episodes. So you've got Jason Bateman, who is not the best humorous ad-libber, even though he's trying. You got Maya Rudolph, who is a good ad-libber, but she's kind of treating the whole thing like it's a joke, which it is, but everyone around her is treating it like it's more serious, and she's like, I don't give a shit. And you have Pete Davidson, who shows up in the last 5 minutes, and he clearly thinks the whole thing is stupid and doesn't give a shit, and he actively tries to sabotage it. And Will Arnett is trying to keep this whole thing together. It didn't really work. They thought it was funny, you can tell, but as a viewer, I didn't think it was that funny. I watched Scrooged, also known as Scream 4, from 2011. I'm interested to know how they decided to make that particular letter the 4, because really, could have been any of those letters. So for those who don't know, the Scream franchise started as a horror movie franchise that kind of poked holes in horror movie tropes, which was very edgy and original back in, 1996?
I think it was 95.
So the entirety of this installment, because it's from 2011, is poking holes in horror movie reboot tropes, which gets pretty old pretty fast because this isn't original. This is the 4th movie in a series. It didn't have a very good impact because as a viewer, you already know what to expect, what they're going to do, and they do it the entire time. They constantly call out the self-awareness, and it's boring. And the characters are all really, really annoying. Especially the fact that none of them are taking anything seriously, even though people are being murdered in the room next to them, and they can hear it and see it and get splattered by their blood. But then they'll walk out of the room and be like, see, what's going to happen next is XYZ, because that's what always happens in these movies. It's like people are actually getting murdered, though, you know? Yeah, I can't think of anybody whose performance I actually enjoyed. And you have a lot of characters from the older movies, like Courtney Cox and David Arquette, and the gal that plays the main character in the first one. I can't remember her name. And then you've got the new generation, which is, what's her face? Hayden Panettiere, is that how you say it?
Something like that.
And Emma Roberts is a psychopath. And in this movie, she also kind of plays a psychopath. I had to make that joke. I know she's a patron, but I had to make that joke. Yeah, they're all really annoying. The thing that surprised me the most was something that was unintentional that they were addressing, which was a prediction of how obsessed everybody would be with having as big of an online following as possible. That's really the main motivation of the killer in this movie. But that was 2011. And looking at it now, you know, over 10 years later, that's pretty much why people do a lot of shit. Put themselves online and try and get as big a following as possible by doing ridiculous crap. I was going to say like and subscribe, you know. But it was a movie I put on in the background because it was not very interesting. And like I said, the self-awareness constantly being winked and nudged and stabbed into you was too much. And I know they made one, last year? And a TV series? I don't know.
I only ever saw the first one, and I barely remember it, but I remember not liking it at the time.
That Wes Craven. I watched Scrooged from 1988, which is a modern take on A Christmas Carol with Bill Murray as a TV network executive. He is all obsessed with profits and sensationalizing everything, so like they're doing their own broadcast of A Christmas Carol, but the promo has like nuclear explosions going off and stuff like that. So it is a humorous movie. And then he's visited by the 3 ghosts, who are comedic. I don't know, you've seen this movie, right?
No.
Really? This is in your prime Bill Murray zone, when you liked him. He's especially weird in this movie. Like his acting, you could tell he said, I'm going to do whatever I want. And the director and whoever was filming was like, okay, we're just going to have to capture it all and make it work.
Is Carol Kane one of the ghosts?
Yeah.
Okay, I think you showed me a part of it, and I was not interested, from what I remember.
It was an interesting and creative take on the story, but it's really a Bill Murray vehicle that seems to have been made for Bill Murray.
I thought you were going to say, but he doesn't know how to drive or something like that.
I only make good jokes.
Hey, that was a better joke than I've heard from you in a long time. So,
I watched Dune from 1984, the David Lynch one, which I haven't seen in a long time, but I have seen the more recent one back in theaters whenever that came out.
was this the theatrical version?
How would I know the difference?
I don't know.
It was whatever Tubi was showing. But having seen the more recent one, that one was so focused on atmosphere and just the gravity of everything. This one felt very action-y, almost comic booky, especially the way the Baron is flying around like a freaking fourth world villain. They really milked the most out of that effect.
I remember that, yeah.
The fact that most of the exposition is done through characters' inner thoughts was interesting. And not even the main characters. Sometimes we have side characters who are just thinking random shit. The score being by Toto is weird, but kind of expected. I mean, that was the time when all of these rock bands were making scores for movies. Like, look at Flash Gordon.
Yeah, or Star Wars by that band John Williams. No, don't put that in there. It's too stupid.
I haven't heard a joke that good in a long time. I thought the production design was pretty cool. It was very creative, even if it felt a little costumey.
There's some cool shots and some cool model work and matte paintings and stuff like that.
Yeah. It doesn't really feel as much a David Lynch movie as other David Lynch movies. This feels more like it had to fit into the Hollywood movie mold. And David Lynch just happened to be at the head.
It's a glimpse of the Return of the Jedi that we never got.
I guess.
Where Sting would have played all of the Ewoks.
I watched Day of the Dead from 1985, which you talked about pretty recently, so I'm not going to talk too much about it. But something that stood out to me was how much of this movie had all of the hallmarks of a low-budget, shitty zombie movie, but this one is not a shitty movie. Like, all the characters are very one-dimensional. They pretty much say the same things the entire movie, regardless of where they are or what they're doing. The sets are very small and enclosed, which you would find in a lot of low-budget stuff. There's not really a ton of action, but what I think sets this one apart is mechanically the way it's shot. The director and the cinematographer know what they're doing. They know how to set shots up, how to frame stuff. And the interactions between these characters, even though they're all saying the same thing pretty much the whole movie, the way they react to each other makes it interesting. And the tension is slowly building and actually feels like it's building. And you know what's going to happen eventually, but it is engaging while you're watching it. And you have that Romero typical thing of the character whose viewpoint is looking at it from the outside, and the helicopter pilot who talks about all the pointlessness of the records in the underground base and how they just need to live. So I thought it was good, and had, like I said, all of the elements of a movie that you would watch that was made in 2014, that was a zombie apocalypse in an underground base, and you'd say, wow, that is a terrible movie because everything would just be bad. But this is good.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I wouldn't have thought about it like that, but that does make sense.
And I think the actors, too, for the most part, do a good job, even though some of them are goofy, like the doctor.
Yeah, and some of the kind of the soldier guys are a little over the top in their kind of manic craziness.
That's their entire character.
Well, yeah.
And man, I'll tell you, it was so satisfying to watch the one dude just get ripped apart and eaten. And I was so upset that the other guy still had a bullet in the chamber to kill himself before he got attacked by zombies. Because I was like, oh man, he's going to put that thing in his mouth, pull the trigger, and it's going to click. And then he's going to get ripped apart anyway. But then he does blow his brains out. And I was like, damn.
Yeah.
That John Goodman piece of shit.
Did you notice the creep show zombie in that scene? The Ted Danson one?
No, I didn't.
He's one of the last ones that guy shoots before he shoots himself.
Oh, that's funny. John Harrison did do the music for this one too, though.
Yeah, which is really cool. I really like some of those tracks on their own. I don't know if I feel like they fit the movie sometimes, but I really like them on their own.
That opening scene is really cool too, where all the hands come out of the wall.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I feel like that's been referenced in a bunch of other things.
Right. And even the way she turns away when the hands come out, it's very dreamlike, almost like a comic book panel.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was cool. So kudos to George A. Romero for making this movie and also that Resident Evil 2 commercial.
Yeah, I was going to say that's the last good zombie thing that he did, but yeah, I forgot about that commercial.
And the last thing I watched was The Day of Sigma, which was a short animated thing which serves as a prequel to Mega Man X, the video game. Because I was playing a collection that had a bunch of Mega Man X games, and it included this 25-minute thing, and I was like, all right. So it shows how Sigma became bad, and how X was built, and how it teamed up with Zero, and it was very weird that they made this at all. So if you're interested to know how Mega Man X started, you should check this out. I'm sure it's on YouTube somewhere. Pretty bad voice acting, too. And that's all I watched. I read The Essential X-Men Volume 1, which was when Chris Claremont and Dave Cockrum, later John Byrne, took over. And correct me if I'm wrong, so this starts at Giant Size X-Men number 1 and then continues with regular X-Men 90-something?
Yeah, 94, I think.
So I read, and I don't know if this is true, from issue 60-something to now, it was just reprints of old stories?
Yeah, the last original issue of X-Men, I think, was 66 in 1970, and they decided to cancel it, but they kind of found out after the fact that the sales had actually been going up. So they said, well, let's keep putting it out, but we'll just reprint stories since we already kind of canceled it, until they figured out what they were going to do kind of to bring it back, and it took 5 years before they actually did that.
So they had 60 issues, but they had to fill 30 issues of filler? That's like just reprinting half of them.
A lot of them were double issues. It would be like 2 issues reprinted in one.
Okay.
I don't know if they reprinted all of it anyway, but that's what they were doing in the meantime, yeah. What's kind of funny is when they did bring them back in 1975 and they did this whole international team, the reason it was an international team, they were looking at kind of how their comics were doing in other countries, and they said, hey, we're doing pretty well in some of these other countries. What we should do is do a team that focuses on characters from those countries. And the idea of bringing the X-Men back was a separate thing, and they decided to combine them. And by the time they actually came up with the characters, it turned out none of those characters were from the actual countries that they were intending to focus on in the first place. But they were like, well, we already have this, let's just go ahead and go with it anyway.
So these Essential volumes, I know they're all out of print, but I know there's the classic X-Men Essential volumes, so that's going to be issues 1 through 67.
Yes.
And then picking up Essential X-Men number 1, starting at Giant Size X-Men number 1, that is an actual direct continuation, even though it seems like there's 30 issues missing.
Right, and the third classic X-Men volume also includes the Beast solo stories that took place in between, and some like guest appearances by the X-Men and other things in between when it was canceled and brought back.
Oh, and I assume all of that is now in the currently printed Marvel Epic stuff, right?
Yes.
Well, anyway, I found it very interesting, this volume. Everyone's character trait is they are angry.
Yes.
Wolverine is angry because he's just angry. Cyclops is angry because he has a new team. Sunfire is angry because he's just angry. Thunderbird is angry because he's just angry. Everyone's just so mad at everything. Sunfire is so mad he just quits. And Thunderbird is so angry he willingly and angrily blows himself up. Which was supposed to be this big traumatic event, but was actually pretty comical considering he'd been introduced 5 minutes before and just went off on everyone constantly before figuratively and physically blowing himself up.
Yeah, I know in real life the reason they killed him off was because they said, A, he doesn't really have unique powers compared to everybody else, so he's kind of redundant in that sense. And B, if we kill somebody off early, it'll let the readers know that anything could happen, anybody could die at any time, basically.
I did like that they pointed out the original X-Men team was a bunch of kids, and these people were not kids, they were all loner adults, and they kind of got angry at Cyclops for treating them like they were all kids.
Yeah, I never really thought about it, but I guess Cyclops is younger than most of them, other than, like, Colossus and maybe Storm. I mean, obviously Wolverine is super old. Yeah, Banshee's an adult. Sunfire, I think, was a little older. Nightcrawler was probably a little older.
Colossus drops a lot of Russian in these, but I wonder if Claremont actually knew what he was writing, or if he just asked somebody else, because a lot of that writing doesn't look like Russian.
Yeah, I doubt it. For some of his other characters, I'm trying to remember which ones, but I know when he would throw, I think like when he would throw French in with like a Gambit or somebody, like it was not accurate from what I remember.
I also noticed Claremont uses as many excuses as possible to get Storm naked.
Yeah, which I don't know.
Whenever they go to a different location, she always dresses in very skimpy outfits. Whenever she's by herself, she decides to just take off all her clothes and have a summer shower.
Yeah, they stopped doing that as much after a while, but that does happen a lot in those early ones.
But also, just in this first volume, I mean, you got 20 issues or something. All of these classic X-Men story things just popping up was pretty crazy.
Yeah, I do feel like a lot of them are very disjointed at the beginning there, partially because you don't really have a like strong characterization for the characters yet. They're not as distinct as they would become. But also, it just feels like one thing after another just keeps popping up, and I feel like they even say that at times. They're just like, we've been dealing with stuff just over and over.
Well, yeah, and one of the running jokes is anytime they get in a vehicle, it blows up and they end up in some random location with some new threat. Okay, so was Moira a character before this, or did she just show up in this?
No, that's where she shows up.
And she just shows up as their housekeeper, which was weird, and it's implied that she and Charles had this romantic relationship, but then that kind of gets thrown out the window when the Shi'ar show up and all of that. There was a lot of things being set up for later, but almost too much. There's too much to keep track of. And then someone would show up and be like, remember me? I was announced 14 issues ago, just off on the side at the very end.
Yeah, I do think it gets a lot more streamlined when John Byrne takes over the art and starts kind of co-plotting. I feel like it becomes a lot more focused on one thing at a time.
And there was some rehashing of stuff, like the one dude brought back the Sentinels, but because it wasn't, who was that guy, Trask, who made the first round of them, there was something missing. The dude only had partial files, so Cyclops was like, these guys are super easy to kill. And then they just wiped them all out, and the guy was like, damn.
Okay, I don't remember that. It's been a while since I've read those.
There were a lot of villains working for other villains who were in turn working for other villains. Someone would talk on a computer screen to someone in Shadow, and then the character in Shadow would turn and talk to somebody else in Shadow.
Yeah, and then it all turns out that all these kind of Earth characters are somehow tied in with the whole Shi'ar thing that's going on, but just as tools, kind of.
Right.
And yeah, I remember the first time I read that, I was pretty confused by a lot of it. It was just too much.
Throw in the Phoenix. You throw in X-Men new team versus X-Men old team twice. And it's funny because the first time you could say, okay, maybe they don't, really know what's going on, and it could be legit, but they're robots. But then they actually meet the old team and they become friends. And then the old team shows up again and says, let's fight. And they're like, what? We were friends. And they're like, what? And then they all just start fighting. It's like, it's clearly not them. When it actually turns out to be Professor X making astral projections of the old team that want to kill the new team. But then it turns out that Professor X making the astral projections is the evil side of Professor X's mind, who he just makes vanish also. Plus, they're like, Beast, I thought you were big and blue and looked like a monster, but now you don't. You look like you did back in the 1960s. And he's like, shut up and fight. And they're like, why is Beast doing this? They're so dumb. You have Savage Land stuff. So is it Sauron or Sauron?
I say Sauron, but I don't know, like dinosaur. But he is named after Sauron from Lord of the Rings.
Is he bad?
He's kind of somewhat more sympathetic, I guess, in his human form, but he is kind of a
dick.
I don't know. He kind of gives in. Yeah, he gives in to his like temptations to suck people's energy out.
Okay, so he's kind of just like an addict.
Kind of, yeah.
Because Kazar was like, hey, me and my buddy, whatever his human name is, are just going to hang out here in the Savage Land. I thought he was bad.
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of, I'm trying to remember, because he had only shown up once before, which was toward the end of, I think it was like X-Men numbers 60 and 61. So toward the end of the earlier run. So I don't actually remember how those ended.
Yeah, whatever his name is, Miklos Roja.
Carl Lycos, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I said. There was a lot of weak stuff in there, too, in these early issues of just things that kind of popped out to be like, oh, here's the monster we got to fight now. That's just a thing.
I feel like I'm assuming that early on it was them just kind of trying different things to see what would work and what would get better sales and stuff like that.
Yeah, and they have goofy stuff, too, like when Mesmero shows up and makes them all carnival attractions like we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you have that ability, why don't you actually do something? But then Magneto shows up and says, "You are so stupid." And he dumps his ass out like 20,000 feet in the air. Because, yeah, they fight Magneto twice. The first time, they all just run away. And the second time, Magneto's like, "You can't run away this time. I'm going to fight you."
Yeah, I thought those fights, the John Byrne fights, I think are really good. I think he's really good at staging action and making the whole team kind of feel like they're doing something.
Yeah, and I was a little annoyed at one issue where they would say, "We've been training together for 6 months, so now we're a better team." It's like, I kind of would have wanted to see some of that.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that was definitely kind of a recurring background element. It's like they need to figure out how to work together.
Yeah. So is Nightcrawler always invisible in shadows?
Yeah, that's kind of one of those things that was introduced early on that they kind of said, well, you know, he just kind of blends in. Like, he's not actually invisible. But early on, it's very clear that he was intended to be literally invisible.
Yeah.
Yeah, they kind of retconned that, I guess, over time.
Because when they were on Banshee's Island castle thing, for some reason all the leprechauns
Yeah.
who save them pull Nightcrawler's invisible body through a trap door. I don't know what the hell was going on in that issue.
Yeah. Yeah, there were a lot of things that were introduced early on that they kind of eventually either changed or kind of said, you know what, let's just drop this because it's just kind of weird.
What about Black Tom Cassidy and Juggernaut being best buddies? Was that introduced in this, or did that have some build-up earlier?
That was the first time that Black Tom Cassidy ever showed up.
Because that was weird. I mean, they pushed him off a cliff or something, and Juggernaut was so emotionally distraught, he hurled himself off of a cliff to try and save him.
Yeah, there's a lot of emotional overreactions in those issues. Some of them feel like they come out of nowhere. Like when Cyclops is sad about Thunderbird dying or whatever, and he's just like blasting stuff all over the place.
Yeah, that was funny. And then Wolverine having his crush on Jean, that kind of comes out of nowhere.
Yeah, I mean, she was hot. Literally. She was a giant bird of fire.
And doesn't really go anywhere because she leaves. And then he just develops his crush on Kazar's cat instead. So it's all good. That's all I read. I am interested in going into Volume 2.
Okay, Volume 2 is the peak, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, there's freaking 11 of those. So that's a pretty far fall to go.
Yeah, I mean, it stays good for a long time, I think.
Okay. I played Mega Man X, which came out in 1994 over here, but in 93 in Japan, which was the first reinvention of the Mega Man series, because they made freaking 6 of those. Because 7 might not have come out until after X, I'm not actually sure. But X is cool, it's tough, standard Mega Man format where one boss's weapon can be used against another one for like more damage, and getting to choose the order in which you play the stages. So that was cool. It's a good game. I played Godstrike from 2021, which is a 3D bullet hell boss rush, which was pretty cool. So you have a time limit for each one. Each boss has different phases, and you can choose to power yourself up, but at the expense of how much time you have to defeat the boss. And when you get hit, instead of losing health, you lose time. So it's all based on time, which was a pretty cool concept. I'm sure it's not original, but I can't think of a game I've done that's like that. And it was tough. And I don't have the patience that I did as a kid, probably because, I have a job and, family and obligations and shit. But I held out. I only took out my anger on, one of my kids. I played a lot of Mario Party from 1998, which is the first one in a series of the 66 Mario Party games that came out on 64, and they re-released it on the Nintendo Switch Online thing. And I think this might be the first time they've re-released the first one. And speculation is because of the joystick controversy. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No.
So Mario Party is a board game between 4 characters. So you each roll a die, move your spaces, and depending on what kind of spaces you land on, you then go into a minigame. And some of the minigames involved rotating the joystick as fast as possible. And on the N64 controller, which was, maybe the first analog controller for consoles?
Yeah, I think so.
They were still figuring that out, so it was very hard plastic, And the way people figured out to rotate the fastest was to put your palm on the joystick and spin around as fast as you could. And it actually caused people to damage their palms because it would just burn into it. There might have been a class action lawsuit against Nintendo at some point for that. I can't remember. I don't even know if that's true. That might just be a myth. But I know they did send out sports gloves to people that complained, which I think is pretty funny. And in the later installments, they removed the joystick rotating type minigames. Also, those joysticks were not very hardy, you know?
Yeah.
They wore out really fast. So if you find a used N64 controller, chances are that joystick is flipping and flopping all over the place. So I have a blood blister on my hand, right in my palm. Still holds true. They put up the first 2 games, and I played a little bit of the second one, and I think I like the first one better. The simplicity of it, the way you can just kind of go through a game faster with people. The second one started introducing all of these extra elements, like you got items, you got battle minigames, you got item minigames, you got all this crazy stuff. And I recall playing the third one as a kid at somebody's house, and there were just so many elements to it. It was just so bloated. I didn't know what the hell was going on. And that was Hudson that developed that back when they were sweet, back before they were absorbed by that monstrosity that is Konami now. Konami is such a waste, you know?
Yep.
And buying Hudson Soft, of all things. Yeah, we're going to buy this company. Oh, you guys are still making games? No. But you just bought a company that makes games? Yeah. What are you going to do with them? Nothing.
Yeah, well, we'll see if anything changes with all this new Silent Hill crap coming out. Maybe it signals a direction.
Yeah, but see, that's the thing. Konami themselves doesn't give a shit. They're just saying, we can make money off of this. Here, let's pass it off to some random-ass developer to do it, and hopefully it turns out well. I mean, look at the last time they did that with Silent Hill.
Yeah, that's true.
I played Death Squared from 2017, which is a puzzle game where there are 4 cubes, and the goal of each stage is to get each cube in its finishing position. But there's a bunch of obstacles, there's a bunch of mechanics, a wide variety actually, and sometimes it changes in each stage because there's 4 color cubes. What moving a certain color does for the stage. It was very interesting. It was very mentally taxing, and I was glad I was playing it with multiple people, because by myself I probably would have gone crazy. Because it helped to have that local co-op feel where you could discuss and argue out loud with the people in the room. I played Mushihime-sama. I probably butchered it, which is a 2004 shmup, which has been re-released on stuff since. Made by Cave. Cave is like king. And the focus of it is bugs. I'm all about killing bugs, so I was all over that shit. I'm not saying I'm good. Lots of continues, but I enjoy it. Speaking of bullet things, I played Cuphead from 2017, which I have not played until now, but I mean, you know the whole history of how it was made and everything, right?
Vaguely. I remember kind of as it came along, as things would come out.
Yeah, it had a pretty long development cycle, and they were fairly transparent as they were doing it, so the end product differed a lot from the initial stuff. But the main claim to fame is the artistic style, so they actually hand animated everything in the same style as 1930s cartoons. So everything has that vintage look, but it's not being mimicked by computer graphics. They actually hand animated everything.
Yeah, which is awesome.
Yeah. And you can find YouTube videos, there's books, there's all kinds of stuff about how they did it. It's semi-difficult, but I really liked it. But I mean, I like all those old cartoons too. All the way they were animated and all that stuff. I played Gato Roboto from 2019, and I know you're going to say you probably played it just because of that name, which is partially true. But that was a very short game. It's a 1-bit Metroid-y platformer where you are a cat who gets into a robot suit after your human's ship crashes on a planet, and you have to go exploring and find help. And it was short, maybe a couple hours, but it was really well made. I was engaged the whole time. And lastly, which I think we're going to talk the most about, I played Resident Evil 4, which originally came out in 2005, and I played the HD version, which has been released on everything. I'm pretty sure I played it at a gas station pump the other day, too. And Resident Evil 4 is such a good game.
I agree.
Not just the fact of, like, the game itself, but the fact that it pioneered so many other things for games after it.
Yeah, and a lot of games I would say did not take the right things from it, or at least didn't implement them in the right ways. I think of QuickTime events in particular as something that I would say at this point is a plague on the video game industry, but I think they're executed pretty well in Resident Evil 4. Although, I mean, God of War is another one that kind of was an early implementer of QuickTime events that came to be very influential like that.
I like how the QuickTime events can be multiple things. You actually have to be paying attention. And the fact that you can die in cutscenes.
Yeah.
I hadn't played this game since 2005, so it kind of felt like it was the first time. I remembered very little. And I won't lie, I did die in some cutscenes, because every time one would start, I would reach for my cup of tea, and then someone would throw a knife at me and be like, shit, shit, oh, and then I would die.
Yeah.
And I did die on the Krauser cutscene like twice.
I remember that being the hardest one, yeah, playing it on a professional.
Yeah, and he's so fast, and you have to do it like 7 times. It was to the point where I would be speaking the lines out loud, because I knew when the QuickTime event was coming.
I remember that one being annoying, because when you would die and you'd have to go through that sequence again, you couldn't just skip past all the cutscenes. You could skip past some of them, but you'd have to watch little bits of it every time, which was annoying.
Yeah, I actually found that harder than the Krauser fight itself. Because I managed to, when you have to fight him, to get him in a staggered knife swing thing, and I just killed him in about 15 seconds. So maybe I just got lucky there. And after I did it, I was like, good, Leon. Yeah, I thought the boss fights were somewhat anticlimactic for a lot of them. Like the Krauser one. And the last boss was not really that difficult.
Is it Sadler? Is that him?
Yeah. Because I had unintentionally kept a bunch of regular grenades, which are an automatic stun for him. So that fight took about 30 seconds too.
Hmm.
And then Ada Wong throwing the special rocket launcher.
Yeah.
Which I played the side story separate ways, where you play as Ada throughout the main story, which is kind of cool how they integrate what she's doing into what Leon's doing, how it's all happening at the same time. Like when Leon enters the village for the first time and the church bell rings and it makes all the Las Plagas people walk away, you find out that Ada herself is the one who rang the bell.
Yeah, I might look up a walkthrough or something for that, because I only have it on the GameCube, and it doesn't include that mode, so I'd be curious.
It was very short. So I thought that, oh, they're going to show where that special rocket launcher came from. Maybe it was researched by somebody, or she found some secret formula. I don't know. But at the end, she just sees it sitting on a shelf and says, Leon, catch! And I was kind of disappointed with that. So having not played it for a long time, I only died maybe 20 times in my first playthrough, which I thought was not terrible. And, 3 of them were during cutscenes. But I thought once your weapons get powered up enough, you're pretty much unstoppable. I think I mained that Red 9 handgun more than anything, and I really didn't have any problems. I will say, though, I did buy a rocket launcher twice because I knew fights were coming up where I just didn't want to have to deal with it. And one was the one hand of Salazar when you're in the sewers underground and you have to freeze it.
Yeah.
And then you just blow it up. And then the other one was Salazar himself because the merchant's right at the top. And I was like, well, I'm going to buy this thing. And then it killed him in one hit, too. But I felt like the Salazar fight felt more like a final boss than the Sadler one.
Yeah, I agree.
And people always complain about the Ashley stuff and say the escort missions are the death of this game, but they are really not that bad. And her AI is not that bad either.
And the game does a really good job of kind of giving you unique situations in those sections where it kind of changes the gameplay up in a way that, makes you have to play it differently. In a really effective way, I think.
And the fact that you can tell her to wait pretty much at any point is really nice, because sometimes you want to clear shit out before you tell her to come hang out with you again.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time people's frustration in sequences like that in games comes more from their own incompetence as opposed to actual shortcomings of the game.
Right.
Especially in this case.
And you only have to play as her once, and it's not really that bad.
I think it's twice.
Twice?
I think so.
I don't think so, because you start as her after Leon saves her from being chained to that wall, and she goes and you have to kind of avoid / burn up the 2 monk dudes, and then go into the knights.
Yeah, maybe that is the only... Yeah, because I can't specifically remember another one.
I will tell you, the hardest puzzle for me is that stupid sliding thing. That probably took the longest out of any part of the game.
I thought that was pretty easy, but okay.
I just hit them randomly until it works.
Yeah, well, no wonder then. I mean, what you need to do is just get the ones that are on the edge next to each other in the right order, and then you just keep sliding them over until they're, one at a time until they're in the right place. I don't know.
I'm not going to do that.
Okay.
So yeah, after I played through it once, I played through it immediately again, and I was not as scared. So I cut off about 4 hours, and then I played through it a third time with the infinite rocket launcher, which cut another 10 hours off of it probably. But it was just so satisfying to walk into a room, see a bunch of dudes, and go, oh, what's up? And just blow them all up. And I like the fact that you have to prove that you can play the game and do it regularly before it gives you that stuff. It's not just like a cheat code you can put in at the title screen,
Yeah, I'm sure there probably is some way to unlock it like that, but yeah.
It's called a Game Shark.
I find it interesting that you beat the game and then you're like, all right, I'm going to use the unlimited ammo rocket launcher, where I beat the game and I say, okay, I'm going to play it on hard and not use any first aid sprays and try to only whatever. I set additional challenges for myself and you're like, no, I'm just going to kill everybody as easily as possible.
Well, that's where you and I differ a lot.
Yeah.
And then after playing one of Ada's stories, you get the Chicago typewriter, which is the infinite ammo machine gun that has bullets that do crazy amount of damage. So I actually played through this game 4 times.
And again, that was not in the GameCube version.
Right. I thought it would be interesting to play the Wii version, especially for the aiming mechanics.
Yeah.
Because it would make things a lot easier, especially during the target test minigame stuff.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see what that's like.
I'm actually playing through the second Resident Evil right now, like on PlayStation. And for the first 2 or 3, there's that sense of dread and horror, it's survival. But the 4th one really starts the shift into action. So the adrenaline is there, but it's not because you're scared, it's because you're just pumped up.
Or even, in that case, overwhelmed a lot of the time by just things popping in from every direction.
Right. I felt the only real scary part of where I was just freaked out was that stupid hedge maze. Those goddamn dogs.
Yeah, that definitely is a scary section.
That felt like more earlier Resident Evil stuff. And I died a couple times there, and I kept trying new strategies. Like one of them, I said, I'm just going to run as fast as I can through this maze until everything is chasing me at once, and then I'll turn around and kill them all at the same time. Which did not work. But even weapons, I didn't even go with the top shotgun. I can't remember what it was. And I think the main reason was because that one loses a lot of damage if they're not right up in your face. And then the sniper rifle, which was clutch. That was just so nice to be able to have that thing with the scope.
Yeah. I think it's really good in the way that the different weapons can, really do change the gameplay of everything. You can play the entire game in a completely different way depending on what you decide to go with. Which also adds to the replayability because you can, focus on different weapons every time.
Right. I never bought the TMP at all because I didn't feel the need of a rapid-fire weapon like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's good since it's so weak and you have so much ammo for it, a headshot still stuns enemies, so you can, just get easy headshots and start doing your kicks.
Yeah, kicks and knife.
And it's good for when, the plagas pop out of their heads or whatever, you can just shoot them really quickly like that.
I got the free Magnum, the Broken Butterfly, but I really only used that on the one boss. What is it, U3 or whatever it's called? The one that Sadler calls It.
Okay.
I don't think they actually give it a name in-game.
The most superfluous boss in the entire game, I think, that's just let's just throw in another boss here just because.
That whole chapter, the chapters are spread out and they're all pretty much the same length, but by the time you get to chapter 5, that is 3 times as long as the other chapters. It's huge. That's when you go to the island, which also feels kind of tacked on.
Yeah, I definitely think the game is way too long.
And I think Chapter 5 is a huge part of that, because there's so much stuff thrown in, and it's so long.
Yeah, I remember the first time I played it, and I forgot that it was 2 discs, and when it was insert disc 2, I was like, oh, I thought it was at the end of the game.
And the game looks so good. I know they're remaking it, and it's going to come out in March, I think, but visually, it already looks so good.
Yeah, this is the most pointless remake of anything that I've ever heard of.
Because I've watched the trailers and the gameplay, and having just played the game, I'm thinking, yeah, that looks exactly like what I just did, just a little nicer. I hope they put in some new original stuff to make it more worthwhile.
There really isn't anything about the game that makes it feel dated or anything like that. I mean, it does feel very different from the newer Resident Evil games that are coming out. Well, first of all, it's not that old, but also a lot of newer games are still using the same ideas and still, playing with the same gameplay mechanics and stuff like that it doesn't feel like an old game.
And something like Resident Evil 2, that remake, using the mechanics of Resident Evil 4, like that seems like a remake that makes much more sense.
Yeah, you're doing something different with it. You're taking it in a different direction. Plus, that is an older game that, I could definitely see elements being updated.
So I'm interested to see what this remake is, what it adds. I will say something I did notice immediately was the lighting. So this remake is going to have lighting much more akin to 7 and Village and stuff, where everything is very dark and can't really see everything. Because Resident Evil 4 is a very well lit game. There is no point where you're walking around in the dark. Even the parts that are in the dark, like Ashley with the Knights, you can still see everything.
Yeah, the trailers do make it look like they're focusing more on atmosphere, but I also wonder how much of that is just going to be the beginning, and then it's just going to turn into just the same kind of action thing.
Because it is an action horror game. It's not a survival horror game, really. So trying to twist that atmosphere to be more horror focused, does that really make sense?
I mean, for me, that's the one aspect that potentially interests me because that would make it a different game as opposed to just the same thing but looking different. But if they do just focus on the action, then really it's going to be about the gameplay, and there's nothing wrong with the gameplay. It doesn't feel like an old game in terms of the gameplay.
If they want to do something really scary, they should have a mode where every enemy is a dog.
I will say I did think the regenerators were pretty scary too. That section was pretty good.
Yeah. So the just interesting mechanics of the game and the sound design where you can hear shit, but you can't always see shit. That was nice.
Yeah.
I also enjoyed blowing them up with the infinite rocket launcher. And they looked like more goofy Resident Evil enemies. I mean, they had their big ass teeth and gross bodies and shit. So yeah, I knew we were going to talk a lot about that game because it's such a good game.
Yeah.
And I don't have a PS5 or anything, so I will have to play that remake somewhere else because, I'm not made of money, which you could help. We do have a Patreon. But I'm interested just to see what it will be like. And I think that's the best way for me to do it because I'm not going to buy all of that just for that game, which we said doesn't really need to be remade.
Yeah. It's definitely something that, I still haven't played the Resident Evil 2 or 3 remakes, so it is something I will play down the road.
And I wonder how much of the humor they're going to keep in that, because a lot of that dialogue is goofy as fuck.
Yeah, that was one of the things that irritated the hell out of me the first time I played it, was how stupid all the dialogue is. And for some people, that seems to be a point of nostalgia or something, but I just think it's really dumb. But it's very typical Resident Evil at the same time.
Right. Capcom's survival horror stuff is much more tongue-in-cheek than I would say Konami's survival horror stuff is.
Yeah, which is why I always preferred, well, not always, but why I definitely now prefer Silent Hill is much more straightforward, more sophisticated, more intelligent, and Capcom is like, hey, let's throw in all these dumb characters and just make it super over the top by the time you get to the end.
And then Sega said, step aside, we're making House of the Dead. Yeah, but I think that's part of the charm of the Resident Evil games.
For some people, I could do without it. I like the early ones. I like laughing at them, but I don't want to laugh at them. I'd rather have a straightforward, serious game.
I could see that, but I am glad that Capcom is aware that they're goofy. They're not unintentionally silly.
Yeah, see, that's where 7 for me was unintentionally silly, and that's why I wasn't really interested in it when I played it, because I thought that was going to be a lot more serious and realistic, and it really wasn't.
I would love to walk into a police station and ask to find a room and have to solve all these puzzles with statues and keys shaped like spades. That would be awesome. Also, if I worked in a police station, I would make it mandatory that there had to be at least one typewriter in there somewhere. And every time I'd clock out, I'd walk over to him and go, ch-ch-ch-ch-ch-ch.
But you'd have to go look for your punch card every time. Yeah, just like something that you clock in and out in, but it looks like a typewriter. And every time you'd have to solve a puzzle to even get your punch card.
Well, That's December of 2022. So it is actually Sunday, January 1st, 2023, as we are recording this.
Yeah, good riddance to last year.
So you're probably watching this. I think we're going to catch up a little bit. Let's say March.
That's pretty optimistic, but yeah, I hope so.
I'm trying to be optimistic.
Okay.
I'm trying to think of a good Resident Evil 4 quote to go at the end here.
I mean, none of the ones I could think of make any sense, really in or out of context.
Good, Leon.
Morir es vivir.